it on the free exercise clause. We have two cases, Masterpiece Cakeshop and Our Lady of Guadalupe, or Guadalupe if you're from Austin, perhaps. Both cases involve a similar issue in very different contexts. The government has a law that prohibits some form of discrimination, whether it's on the basis of sexual orientation or perhaps age or disability. And a person of faith seeks an exemption from that law barring discrimination. And we've discussed this sort of dynamic before in the context of the freedom of association. We did cases like the Jaycees case, your favorite from New Jersey. And we did Boy Scouts versus Dale, which were similar. In those cases, you had organizations that had policies that excluded certain types of people. And in one case, it was found to be a public accommodation, and they could not deny access to women for their meetings in Jaycees. In the other case, they found that the Boy Scouts were able to exclude gay scoutmasters. So we're looking at a similar issue, though, but not through some sort of nebulous freedom of association, right? There was no argument that the Jaycees were religious or the Boy Scouts were denying gay scoutmasters for religious reasons. They were relying on the sort of substantive due process freedom of association. But today's class, we are in the core of free exercise, right? We have a person declining to make a cake for a same-sex wedding based on his faith. It's also speech. Well, we'll get to the speech in a minute. And in the second case, we have a Catholic school, which is saying it's exempt from different types of, discrimination laws because it has a right to choose its own ministers, whatever a minister means. These cases are pretty recent. Masterpiece was, 2018? And Lady of Guadalupe was 2020, barely, the case is 6 months old. It's fresh, first time I'm teaching it. So we have these decisions that are pretty recent. Masterpiece Cakeshop was decided with Justice Kennedy still in the court. This was his final term, and in fact, this I think was one of his final majority opinions, which perhaps puts into perspective how you view Kennedy on his way out the door, that this was the last decision or one of the last big decisions that he decided to write. And Our Lady of Guadalupe was decided by sort of the new Roberts Court, but it still wasn't 5-4. You still have Breyer and Kagan with sort of idiosyncratic approaches to religion that puts them at odds with Sotomayor and Ginsburg. All right, so these are two recent cases that I don't know exactly where they fit. It's often difficult to see where a case fits until some time has passed. I think Masterpiece may just be an outlier. I don't think there's much going on there because it's such narrow ground. So I don't know the relevance. Our Lady of Guadalupe, on the other hand, though, seems to settle the issue pretty decisively in favor of religion, although perhaps not as decisively as the church would have hoped. Okay. All right, let's go through them. Where am I on the queue? Who is next?
I think I'm next.
Who's that? Is that Adam?
Yes.
All right, Adam, thank you for volunteering. Let's start. You want to give me the facts, please, in Masterpiece Cakeshop?
Yeah, so basically a gay couple, I want to say, I forget their exact names, but either way, they went into this Masterpiece Cakeshop in Colorado and basically explained that they wanted a cake for their wedding. Obviously, at the time, they couldn't get married in Colorado, but they were, I think, getting married in Massachusetts, if I'm not mistaken. So at that point, apparently, and again, I forget his exact name, but
Jack Phillips was a baker.
Jack, yeah, he explained to them in honestly a polite manner, from the sounds of it, that he'll make them a birthday cake, he'll make them a graduation cake, whatever cake, but he baking a cake for a same-sex wedding goes against his own personal religious beliefs. And then, as the story goes, they file a suit, kind of via CATA, the Colorado Anti-Discrimination Act, and the snowball keeps rolling.
Keeps rolling, right? Okay, good. Thank you, Adam. So the Masterpiece Cake Shop is a very small bakery outside of Denver. I think they had a couple employees. I think Jack Phillips was the baker, and maybe they had one or two other people working there, under 5. I was in Denver about 2 years ago. I decided to just take a drive. 1 second, Nancy, I'll get to you in a second. I just decided to take a drive by there. And I was shocked how small it was, right? I was expecting this huge, elaborate bakery. It was a small shop in a strip mall. And if you drove quickly, you would never even notice it. So it's a very small place. Yes, Nancy, go ahead.
I don't know how to put my hand down. My issue with this, I understood both. I like to read summaries of the cases before I read the case itself. So when I read different people's opinions, I thought, okay, I can understand both sides of this, and I can understand this argument about this Jack guy who wanted to have something offensive on his cake, and it was okay for the bakers to say no to him, but not, or just stating something against gay marriage, right? My issue came up on page 459 of the supplement, right at the beginning. He says that creating a wedding cake for a same-sex wedding would be equivalent to participating in a celebration that's contrary to his own beliefs. I find that problematic because he's essentially making a judgment about the private sexual lives of these people. It's really not about marriage. It's about the private sexual life that he doesn't agree with. And I find it very hard to believe that any straight presenting couple that came to him, that he would ask them, I'm a Christian. Are you both virgins? Do you ever swap with another couple? Have you ever had an abortion? Have you ever, it's have you ever been divorced before? There are people who have, religious beliefs in the Christian community or otherwise that would disagree with celebrating a particular marriage, but because it's not evident on its face, then, they're not asking those questions. Or I will say in disclosure, I identify as a queer woman, but I don't only date women. So when I'm in a straight presenting relationship, that is still a queer relationship. But if I went in with a man and I asked for a wedding cake, he's going to assume that's a straight couple. We are not.
I just want to jump in because...
Hold on, you guys raise your hands. We can't free for all. Yeah, okay, so just you want to speak, you got to raise your hand. All right, let me just talk about Nancy's point for a minute, and I'll be happy to call on. I think it was Jay, his hand up as well. I think what you're getting at is almost like a hypocrisy argument in a way, right? It's sometimes people pick and choose which tenets of faith they decide to hold dear, right? So I don't know if Phillips has an objection to divorce, but let's just say he does, right? Or let's say he thinks that a couple shouldn't get divorced, and he wouldn't make a cake for, say, a second marriage, right? Or let's say that a couple is having an affair, to your swapping example, right? And let's say that they want to make some sort of ceremony commemorating, having an illicit affair, right? Which, thou shalt not cover the neighbor's wife, right? So it's some form of adultery. So I think what Nancy's getting at, and correct me if I'm wrong, Nancy, is that you don't find his objection sincere or perhaps consistent because he's only flagging it in a specific type of customer where it's obvious that it's two guys getting a same-sex union. Is that sort of what you're getting at?
Absolutely. Another example would be a Jewish or Christian man marrying a Muslim woman. They're fine with that. He's not going to stop and ask them unless maybe the woman walks in with a hijab maybe he would say something then, and then I think we might have a different argument here from the court.
So yeah, let me address your point. So basically what you're saying is he's picking and choosing, kind of like a buffet of the different tenets of his faith. He's not actually following his faith, consistently. The response to that is the courts don't care about that. And I'll explain why. No, did I get it wrong?
No, it's not that I think he's picking and choosing. It's that I think the court is picking and choosing which rights can be more protected and which rights can't.
The court doesn't.
It's not as visible. It's not as protected.
The court only decides the cases before them, right? The court can't pick and choose who comes to the court. So Phillips came here and he said, I was sincerely held belief that a same-sex union, it goes against my religious beliefs. The courts don't then say, well, why didn't you fail to object to X, Y, and Z, right? Because that would be asking, why aren't you following other perhaps tenets of your faith? The general rule is the courts will assess whether the belief is sincerely held. They will not challenge what the doctrines of that faith are. So they wouldn't go ahead and say, you're objecting to this, but you're not objecting to X, Y, and Z. That means you're insincere, right? In other words, they're not going to apply some sort of a least restrictive means or narrow tailoring to a person's religious beliefs. Unless they have evidence that Jack Phillips perhaps made a cake. I'll give you an example. Let's say he made a cake for a white gay couple, but not for a black gay couple, right? He says, oh, I don't want to make a cake for this black gay couple. In that case, think, well, the exact same act, you didn't do this, so that maybe you're not so sincere. Maybe you just don't like black people, right? The courts are not going to get the sort of the narrow tailoring argument that you're raising, which I think makes sense as a logical matter. But the court doesn't want to get in the business of saying, what is your faith? What are the tenets? What are things that perhaps you should object to? And why you're not objecting to that?
So you can't say then, all right, if making sure that your work or your creations are in line with your faith, are you issuing a questionnaire to every client? I mean, to me, that's what makes sense, as opposed to, and I can understand, you don't want to put two men kissing on the cake, get over it, but fine, whatever. Okay. We'll go buy our own and put it on our cake. But they didn't even describe their cake. He just looked at them and said, no. My grandparents, unfortunately, would have had the same religious, albeit misguided, objection to interracial couples, but that wouldn't have been upheld. So it's because, and it's a private matter, and it just really gets me worked up, obviously.
Okay, I appreciate that. I'll get to Jay in a second since he's been patiently waiting. One of the issues in this case was, could a bakery put up a sign saying, we will not serve gay customers? In fact, that would sort of address we would not make cakes for gay weddings. That would sort of address who you're picking and choosing. Imagine a guy walked in by himself, said, I need a wedding cake, didn't say what it was for, but it's for his gay wedding. Jay, you've been patiently waiting. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but you got to raise your hand if you want to talk.
Nancy picked up on the exact same thing I did, which is probably because we're both queer people. Everybody, I'm not closeted in any way. All of my colleagues know I'm a gay man, so I'm not uncomfortable speaking about this. I would also add I would add more to the disclosure element here, because I don't feel like the court even considers the fact that this whole issue wouldn't have happened without the disclosure. So if I sent my mom in, if I was to get married, which I won't probably, if I sent my mom to buy the cake and she just pretended, and he made the cake and didn't come to the ceremony, I just don't get it. It's just a cake, It's like you have to disclose the fact that you're queer to them for them to invoke everything that the court is analyzing here.
Yeah, so it's rare. Jay, would the question be different if you wrote on the cake and frosting a wedding between Adam and Steve, and you had the little cake toppers, right? And you had two grooms kissing a little cake topper.
Yeah, and with the way the court uses the analogies of the past cakes that they denied because they were anti-gay on their face, I think that's a fault. I thought this whole opinion was full of really false analogies, because it's really trying to say that supporting something and demeaning it should be controlled under the same. It kind of feels like I feel like those things should be distinguished. Like, you don't have to vocally support something, but that doesn't mean that it's the same situation when you're vocally demeaning it.
Okay. I want to make sure I hear from everyone. Does anyone else have a question before I move on? I actually want to get to the case, but does anyone else want to have some preliminary comments? Very good comments from both Nancy and Jay. I appreciate your candor. I know it's not always easy talking about things that affect you personally, but I think it's in a responsible fashion. All right, Natalie, I think you're next on the list.
Yes, hello.
Hi, Natalie. So, Natalie, let's put aside baking for a minute. Let's talk something else. Let's talk about perhaps wedding photography, right? In fact, I think baking of all the various cases is probably the worst vehicle, as we say. What if you were a photographer? I'm not saying you in particular, but what if you have a wedding photographer? Do you think there's a difference between making a cake in your own bakery at home and just handing it to someone, they can do whatever they want with it? Option number one. And option two, actually going to the ceremony, watching it, getting up close, positioning the people, saying, "Oh, you stand here and you stand there," and then you're editing the photos and you're trying to make them look nice. Do you think there might be a difference between baking and actually attending the ceremony as a photographer?
Not really. I think they're both pretty far removed from an ideological expression. When you're baking a cake, yes, I guess that involves some artistic expression, same with being a photographer, but that's not exactly endorsing a certain viewpoint.
Okay, I'll change it. Remember the KKK walks into your office, wants you to photograph a Klan rally, cross burning. Mm-hmm. You know that was coming, right? They want you to photograph a Klan rally, and they want you to photograph, and you have to give them an album and say, "Oh, Natalie made me this album."
Well, so what's my question? I wouldn't want to partake in that.
Would photographing a Klan rally in some way respect some sort of endorsement that you're actually putting some sort of your creativity? Oh no, you stand there. We get better lighting, right? We have to position the cross a little bit better, right?
I guess in that instance with photography, that would give hints of more so of an endorsement of their beliefs.
Okay, so photography is perhaps a little bit more than baking.
Maybe a little bit, yeah.
All right. Who's next? Presley, you here?
Yeah, I'm here.
So Presley, let me ask you a related question. What about being not a pastor, but like an officiant, right? You can register with the state to officiate at weddings. You're not religious, right? Right. You might be religious, but you're not a member of the cloth, right? You just register with the state to be an officiant. What if the state said that if you are a registered officiant, you're required to do same-sex unions? You cannot turn them down. Would that be different than baking and photographing? In other words, you have to recite the vows. You have to actually say certain things by the power vested in me, by the state of whatever. Is that perhaps a different level than baking or photography?
Well, personally, I would say no. And the reason that I feel that way is because my religion that I grew up in was kind of like, if you go to a bar, even if it's just to eat, then you're condoning anything that bar is going to do, serving drinks, serving alcohol, anything. And so that would be the same. I would put them all on the same level, because the way my religion went was, if you're doing anything that furthers something that the religion didn't believe in, then you're condoning it and you're partaking in it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Nancy,
I personally don't believe that now, but.
That's okay. Nancy, I see your hands up.
I just wanted to say my issue is, yes, I think that the baker is arbitrarily, applying his beliefs, but I also think the court can't say, yes, you can say you have a sincerely held religious belief against this, and we're not going to intervene. But if you're, if the Ku Klux Klan was a religious group, I don't know if they identify as religious or not, do they?
They are. They're religious and political, so they had both.
Right. Okay. But let's say it wasn't, let's say my religion was that all, Black people were sinful. Okay. I'm very sorry to use that as the example, but that's the clearest example I could say. Most certainly the state, the court, rightly so, would step in and say, no, you can't discriminate on that. Well, it's my sincerely held belief. So how is that different from the private things that people do in their homes? I don't.
Okay. All right. So there's an issue lurking here in the background, and that's why I deliberately hit, I'm sorry, Natalie, with the KKK example, because you knew it was coming. I I just sort of lined up ready to pounce. I could have also said someone wants a cake made with a swastika on. I've had that example in the past before, right? Could a baker be required to make a cake with a swastika on it for a neo-Nazi celebration? Happy birthday, Hitler, right? You can make up the examples all day long. Could you make a Muslim baker put a pig, not an actual pig, but a depiction of a pig on a cake? Could you have a Muslim baker put the Prophet Muhammad on the top of a cake, right? I can make examples till the end of time. But there's an issue lurking in the background that I want to address. It's sort of the elephant in the room. And that's a Obergefell, right? And Obergefell was sort of creeping in the background of this case, and it's mentioned in a few different points in a way that Justice Kennedy, people who support Obergefell were not so happy with the way Obergefell was cited in this case, right? Obergefell, of course, was a 15 decision where Justice Kennedy said that the 14th Amendment protects the right of gay marriage. But then he had this language at the end about religious freedom. He said, well, people have the right to worship and belief. And he had this nebulous language. And then he kind of came back here and cited saying, well, people can still disagree. In other words, you can disagree with gay marriage without being a bigot. And that's what Kennedy was saying. And this tees up the issue, which I don't think we can do in the next 45 minutes. Is there a difference between race and sexual orientation? People don't like when I raise the question, but it's true. In other words, is there a difference historically in the United States between saying I won't serve black customers at all versus I won't make a specific product for gay couples? Does that analogy hold? Do we have this endemic of Jim Crow where there's thousands of bakeries telling gay couples they can't have weddings like you had in Jim Crow, where you can't eat anywhere? Or is it, maybe a couple in an entire state that refuse to make this product? So does the analogy for gay rights need to parallel the analogy for racial discrimination? Now you say, of course, all discrimination is equal, right? Of course, you can say that. The court hasn't addressed the scrutiny issue, whether it's strict or intermediate. They haven't really addressed that. But this is lurking in the background. I'll give you one more data point. Just yesterday, about, 25 Christian schools had complaints filed that they were basically treating gay and lesbian students improperly. And they've argued that after Obergefell, that sort of treatment is no longer permissible. And they're basically trying to get tax-exempt status revoked from these universities or have all federal funding withdrawn. And the lead case that they're relying on is a case called Bob Jones, which is a case from the 80s. Bob Jones University, is it South Carolina? I can't remember. I think it's South Carolina, would not allow interracial dating. Into the 1980s, they would not allow gay, white, and black people to date on campus. No interracial unions. And the question is whether Bob Jones could keep its tax-exempt status. And the court, and it was a messy case, ultimately said, no, the government can withhold tax-exempt status from Bob Jones because it's interracial dating ban. And so what the groups that followed suit yesterday are saying, well, what's the difference between race and sexual orientation, right? In other words, if a Christian university will lose its tax-exempt status for barring black and white from dating, why not a gay and straight, right? Why have this different standard? And it goes back to Obergefell. Obergefell suggested that people can, in good faith, oppose gay marriage, which is the exact opposite we had in Loving, right? In Loving, they said that this is white supremacy. You can't have it in any regard. Messy, right? That's lurking in the background, and you can read Kennedy very carefully, and you know where he's thinking about this issue. All right, I saw a lot of hands that went up and maybe went down. Ryan, go ahead.
Yeah, I think where I arrived at after sort of covering all these cases is sort of what we led with to start it is why do we even protect religious thought and earnest belief over other thought, earnest belief? You know, a lot of the things my classmates have been saying sort of strike at the heart of that is we prioritize their earnestly held religious belief, but we don't prioritize earnest held belief at all. You know, as in comparison, we're not really interested in protecting that. And I just think that we have enough protections for assembly and association and speech that could encompass all of these religious practices enough to protect them without having to single them out and place them on a podium above other earnestly held beliefs just because you have it couched in some religion, whatever that means. So that's
I
just
think
kind of what I
yeah.
was
I
thinking.
think I asked that question maybe 2 weeks ago. Why protect religion at all? Remember when I asked that question? And I asked it quite deliberately because you keep coming back to the same point. Why does one set of beliefs trigger certain protections that non-faith people would have? And I think the way you answer that question largely informs the answer to Masterpiece and also our Lady of Guadalupe, our next case, which I will try and get to in a moment. All right. Anyone else? I do want to talk about Masterpiece a little bit more. Maybe I'll lecture a bit because I want to get through the case. All right. So the speech issue is hard. I think photography is speech without question, right? If you're going to a wedding and you're photographing something, you're putting your artistic creativity, saying, oh, you move here, you move there, position people. If you've ever been to a wedding, those photographers are artists. I don't care what you say. They are artists. They are really putting their creativity into the process, how to adjust the lighting. There's so many things that go into it. I think the photography cases are a lot harder because you're actually at the ceremony. And I think going to the ceremony is much more of some sort of an endorsement or the word equivalent to participating, right? If you're actually in the ceremony, you're pretty close to participating, right? Baking a cake is harder because first off, you're not going to the ceremony. You're making a product that you're giving to someone who I think will transport to the wedding. Maybe the baker drops off the catering hall. I don't know. Maybe that's how it works, but it can be avoided. But is actually making a cake speech? I go both ways. I think it's hard. If you talk to a baker, they consider themselves an artist. I think the baker who wouldn't make the anti-gay cake or the anti-trans cake said, I don't want to be forced to, use my artistic efforts on this cause. I think he's probably right. I think the Masterpiece cake should have been decided on the basis of speech. The court should have decided it's a speech or it's not, but they punted. Instead, we have the most Justice Kennedy opinion imaginable, animus, which I think is such a weak basis for this for this case. There were some comments in the record by these sort of administrative law judges suggesting that religion should not be used as a shield for discrimination. What I think a couple of you actually articulated that view quite eloquently in this class. And Justice Kennedy said, oh, we can't have that. That's a form of animus under Lukumi. This was Kennedy's obsession. He was obsessed with animus, that if you take an action with the bad thought that made you bad, he always looking for what is in a person's head, what is in the government official's head, why are they doing it? The upshot is we have this ruling that applies to one case. I don't know how Masterpiece extends beyond the facts presented here. I don't know. I have no idea. The reason why is that going forward, members of government will be smart and keep their mouth shut and say absolutely nothing. They won't say a word about religion because if they do, they might get triggered for animus. So the upshot is it just tells members of government to keep their thoughts to themselves and go ahead and sanction these members of various religious groups. Jack Phillips's story ain't over. After this case was decided, a trans person went to the bakery and said, I want to make a cake for a transgender, some sort of party relating to being transgender. I can't remember what the details were. He knew he would make the cake. He went there for the sole purpose of triggering a lawsuit. That's why he went there, right? This wasn't like a genuine effort. He went there. I think he actually, okay, I didn't know that. Thank you. He went there for that exact purpose. And this is now going before the Colorado courts again. And actually the arguments were, I think, maybe a week or two ago. So this case may go back to the court again on the trans issue. And I'm pretty sure in this case, you're not going to have the animus issue because the government's not stupid. They won't repeat the same mistake. So perhaps this case might raise the speech question squarely. And it's a court without Justice Kennedy. Even if the court rules in favor of Phillips, I think this is a fading issue. Let me explain why. The number of bakers who actually raise these claims is very small. I mean, I can probably count them on two hands. Most bakeries are interested in profit. They're not interested so much in this sort of ideology. So, they will probably either have someone else make the cake or they'll just swallow their pride and just do it and get over with. So I think these sorts of cases are going to just vanish just on their own for the same reason that you don't see many grocery stores trying to exclude Black customers. That sort of faded. It happened a lot in the 60s and sort of just faded out. I don't know how long the fade will take. And perhaps the court in Massachusetts is trying to punt and say, look, let's not decide this because this issue will just go away and pray it will go away. But Phillips is still litigating. There's a case in Washington involving a florist, and that sort of just keeps floating around. So there are a handful of cases that may continue, but I think in 10 years, it's hard to predict 10 years, but maybe in 10 years, these cases will probably just disappear. And, we'll move on. Okay. The case was 7-2, but I got to tell you, the Sotomayor case, the Ginsburg-Sotomayor dissent was very mild. She agreed with a lot in the majority opinion. So the dissent was very narrow. And I think they raised some of the sincerity issues that Nancy spoke about before. But this was 7-2. It was pretty close to unanimous. Not exactly, but the Ginsburg dissent, I only gave you a scroll excerpt. It was only 8 pages. And usually Ginsburg writes long dissents. This was only 8 pages. She agreed with a lot of the Kennedy. Yeah, Macy, go ahead.
I'm a little bit confused on if there's a rule to take away from this case, or if we're just kind of left in the same place that we were before, just with one case resolved.
Yes. It's Kennedy. He doesn't resolve cases. He does blah. I mean, this is why, forget Justice Kennedy's jurisprudence. Teaching his cases are awful because every Kennedy case, a student asks me, Josh, what's the rule? I'm like, I don't know. Ask Justice Kennedy. Animus, right? Based on the specific factors in this case, someone said something he shouldn't have said, and that renders the entire thing bad. Right? It doesn't even matter what Jack Phillips said. It doesn't matter what the gay couple said. None of that matters because one member of the Colorado government mentioned the Holocaust, and that was enough to trip the entire case.
Why does the Supreme Court waste their time taking up these kinds of
Because
cases?
Justice Kennedy doesn't like deciding cases. He likes just sort of balancing things out, like Thanos, who just sort of evens things out and doesn't worry about the details. I mean, read any Kennedy opinion has the same flaw. All of them. Any Kennedy opinion refuses to actually address the issue. He doesn't talk about scrutiny. He doesn't like talking about fundamental rights. He just sort of blah. So, he's off the court. I don't have to worry about him anymore, but his opinions are still here.
Okay.
I know. Sorry, a little bit of a rant. If you're in my common class, you've heard that probably 100 times.
100%.
Yeah. You know the drill. All right, Gavin, and then Blake.
Yeah. Following up on what Macy asked there, would it be accurate to say that the ruling here is that it violated the free exercise clause because the Anti-Discrimination Act wasn't neutrally applied?
No. Well, I wouldn't even go that far. I think it's because there's some animus in the record. It's not even that the act was not applied neutrally. It's because of one or maybe 2 people in the entire Colorado government who said something was improper.
But wouldn't the animus indicate that it wasn't neutrally applied? Like they weren't neutral in that they had animus?
I wouldn't go that far. I mean, this was a case where the gay couple brought this complaint before the Colorado government, right? It wasn't the government was going after Phillips, right? The couple brought this complaint. So I really think I wouldn't even make in terms of neutrality. I think that might be going a little bit too far. I mean, perhaps if you have a government, usually with neutrality, you think of on the face of the law, is it neutral, right? Right. That's usually what I think of. But here, let's say there were 100 people in the Colorado government who all acted neutrally, and you had 2 idiots who made some comments.
Okay.
I don't think those 2 people are enough to say that the entire edifice is not neutral. I wouldn't go that far.
Okay, I'd agree there. That's from what I pulled from the case. They talked about neutrality a lot and how, because of these statements that were made, went away from that. So that's why I clarified.
But no, you're right. But I wouldn't take Justice Kennedy too seriously. Like I know this is awful, but he says things that don't actually match up with case law consistently, and then you sort of have to piece together what he's saying after the fact. That's why I dislike teaching his cases. Okay, Blake, and then we'll go on to next case.
On that point, I think Kennedy just used this case used the commission as a scapegoat, not to actually give a solid ruling, which is why I've always thought, as the trans issue is coming up, that we just have to wait for this case to be settled appropriately for the commission to keep their mouth shut and let it take its due process.
No, you're right. Yeah, in the trans case, I expect every member of government will keep their mouth shut and say absolutely nothing. They'll keep their mouth shut and make no comments about anything and say, here's the law, we're applying it neutrally, we're done.
What I was getting to, the photography question isn't as hard as I as I thought it was, and it clicked something in my brain. If I'm a photographer or a baker or an artist or whatever, I have inherent skills that I've now put on the market for public use, which CATA covers. If I'm hired to go to a wedding to take pictures, I'm performing a service for them. I'm not participating. I'm not creating art in my sense. I'm creating a product for somebody else, just as a doctor or paramedic would use their skills to help somebody that needs a service performed. So unless I'm creating that art for myself to showcase in my own gallery, then there really shouldn't be a restriction on, or I guess there should be a restriction on discrimination.
Yeah, I don't think every artist would agree with you on that one. I see. I mean, that's one way of looking at it, but a lot of artists feel that whether they're making art for themselves or others, they're engaging their talents, and that's their speech.
I mean, I'm a performer of 10 years. If I go and perform in anything where I'm representing myself as a Nazi or an anti-gay legislator, or Angels in America has some bad people, if I'm representing myself as a bad person, that's not me endorsing any of those activities. That's, you're
right, but not everyone agrees. Not everyone agrees with that perspective. It's some people do think it's endorsed, and some people wouldn't take those roles, right? Because they do think it's an endorsement. But again, different strokes for different folks, right? People don't always view the issue the exact same way. And then perhaps it's a way of, let me wrap up with this comment. We have to move on to the next case. It's what level of deference does the state grant to the people of faith? Are we deferring to the views for what Nancy says, or are they being sort of these picking and choosing, right? Or are we saying, well, take your belief, you seem sincere, that's good enough, let's move to the next step of the analysis. And consistently, the courts are not going to be in the business of saying, oh, you're not sincere. This is, you're just there, you're just a performer, you're an empty vessel. You just click, 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 Photoshop, 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 right? Mix, 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 stir, 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 crack an egg, right? The courts are not going to get involved with scrutinizing those steps, but it's a huge issue. This case is not going in our case book because, again, I don't know where it fits. I have no idea what its relevance is. I think it's probably going to be an outlier. It's a good case for discussion. I think we had a really good discussion today, but I don't know if it's something that'll be worth teaching for the foreseeable future, especially now that Kennedy's off the court. I just think it was a sort of compromise for 2018, and that's where it's going to stay. All right. The next case, which we have 13 minutes to talk about, is Our Lady of Guadalupe, excuse me, versus Morrisey-Berru. This case involves a so-called ministerial exception. And I can explain it simply, right? Generally, the state imposes restrictions on who an employer can hire and fire, right? You can't fire an employee because of their race, or you can't refuse to hire someone because of their religion, right? But what if a church determines that their minister is insufficiently Catholic, right? Let's say that they determine that, you have a Catholic minister who decides to start worshiping Satan. I'll give you an easy example, right? He says, I am now a member of the Church of Satan, which is an actual church, and I'm going to now worship Satan during my personal life. Not even in the pulpit. In the pulpit, he'll do Catholic teachings, but in his personal life, he's going to worship Satan, and he announces this publicly. I think everyone, even the dissenters, would agree that the church be able to fire that minister who's now preaching Satan because that is something inconsistent with their beliefs. So and even though they're discriminating the basis of religion, the priest should not be able to come back and sue them for discrimination. Okay, that's the easiest case in the world, right? Everyone will agree with that one. But what if you have a harder one, right? What happens if the priest, instead of worshiping Satan, has a relationship with another woman, which is barred by the teaching of the Catholic Church? Okay. The priest has a relationship with another man of age of consent. So don't go there quite yet, right? A man of the age of consent. Could they fire him for that? What if the priest has a relationship with a woman and he encourages her to get an abortion, right? And then they decide to fire him for those reasons. It gets slippery. Okay, now move on from the priest, and let's talk about other people in the church. Let's say you have a person who instructs on Bible, right? And the person who instructs Bible does all those things. Has a relationship with a person of the same sex, counsel someone to have an abortion, worship Satan, whatever they want. Can the church remove that person without regard to discrimination law? Okay. Now slide forward to the case we have here. You have teachers. They're not Bible teachers. They teach, secular subjects. But they do have some role of religious instruction. And they may serve as role models. And the church may want its teachers to follow certain standards, even if they're not religious teachers. In this case, you have 2 people fired. The school, in both cases, say it was for performance issues, right? The people say, no, this was age discrimination or discrimination because of disability. One of them had breast cancer. She actually died, so she died while the case was pending. Can the church get an exemption from the general discrimination laws because they're house of worship and this person has some sort of religious function? And this is the issue of the ministerial exception. There was a case in 2012 called Hosanna Tabor Evangelical Church versus EOC. This case was involved a math teacher. No, was she a math teacher? I can't remember. She was a teacher. I think she taught math. Cheryl Parrish. And the question is whether she was a so-called minister. In that case, the Obama administration argued that there basically was no ministerial exception, didn't exist, that there was no carve-out for houses of worship, right? That maybe for priests and ministers, they might be an exemption, but there should not be a general exemption for anyone else. That lost 9-0. So at the time, in 2012, the court basically said, yes, this exception exists, and the teacher in that case fell within the exception. But surprise, surprise, it wasn't really clear in Hosanna Tabor what the rule was, right? It wasn't really clear what the rule was. Okay, so this case, Morrisey-Berru clarified the issue. Okay, let's see who's next. I don't know where the hell I am.
I think I'm next.
Paul. Okay, so Paul, what are the sort of 4 circumstances that Hosanna Tabor identified when considering whether a person should fall within this ministerial exception?
They talked about how Miss Parrish had the title of minister.
Okay, so number 1 is a title, right? She was called a minister. Okay, good.
Mm-hmm. And that she had a lot of religious training in her background. Also that she held herself out as a minister.
Okay.
And, that her job duties involved stuff that would be regularly attributed to ministerial work, teaching people about faith.
Good, very good. Okay. All right. So in 2012, the court sort of laid out 4 factors, right? What's the person's title? Is there religious training involved? Does she hold herself out as a minister? And does she convey the church's message? Convey the church's message. All right. That was a test that was needed to get, the votes of Justice Kennedy, which is no longer the case. You really see, I'm trying to tell you, the court's jurisprudence may become not to your liking, but it's become clearer, right? Espinoza, right? Guadalupe. You may not like the result, but there's a clear test because it was impossible to nail Kennedy down to anything of substance, which he refused to. So he these 4-factor free-floating balancing tests that don't even know where they go. Here, they basically said, yeah, we have these 4 factors, but most of them don't matter. Really, the one that matters is number 4. Right? The court says it doesn't really matter what title she has. It doesn't really matter if she has religious training. It doesn't really even matter whether she calls herself a minister. What matters are her functional job duties. What is she actually doing? Is she providing some sort of religious instruction? The answer is yes. Then she qualifies for the ministerial exception. and the church can seek an exemption from the anti-discrimination laws, right? I want you to just recognize what's going on here, right? The court is giving a fairly bright line rule where before you had a balancing test, right? And the balancing test wasn't very good because the church could just call everyone a minister, right? I actually remember before this case was decided, a lot of places were saying, you know what? Everyone in the building is going to be called a minister. You're a minister, and you're a minister, and you're a minister, and you're a minister, right? They would make everyone get 5 minutes of religious training or something like that. They would make everyone say your title is minister, call yourself. In other words, you can rig the balancing test. It's very easy to rig this balancing test. It's not hard, right? Churches can adopt policies to designate virtually everyone. But the court said enough with that. Let's go to the fourth factor. If you're conveying the church's message in any regard, you're a minister. So the teachers are covered. What about a janitor? You might say, of course not. A janitor doesn't convey the church's message. Well, what if the janitor is responsible for building the nativity scene, right? Maybe he's a handy guy and he builds a nativity scene every Christmas, and he helps build different structures used for prayer, right? What about a person in the kitchen, right? A cook in the kitchen. Well, maybe the cook is responsible for following certain dietary laws, like the laws of kosher or the laws of halal. So the test here might be bright, or at least brightish line, but it's pretty expansive. The full scope of this has not been fleshed out yet. I think Justice Sotomayor's dissent is kind of pushing in that direction. Like, where are we going with this, right? And she has in mind, again, actual discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. This is not going away. This issue is just lingering. Here the people are fired for performance issues ostensibly. What happens if a church fires an employee because they find out he's gay, or they find out he entered into a gay union, or he finds out he's trans, right? Those are the cases that are going to blow up. These cases were sort of under the radar, but the exact same issue of masterpiece will come up again with this test. Is there going to be any difference between race and religion? The Bob Jones example I gave to earlier start of class. You're taking common law now, and this March of 2021. I'll be talking these issues for years to come, right? Eventually, I think they'll fade, but these issues are still live. All right, I got about 2 minutes left. Someone just sent me a private message. I just want to flag it. And the question is, why did the couple go to Masterpiece why did the trans person go to Masterpiece for the purpose of suing, right? Why didn't they just go to another bakery? Or why did the gay couple even not go to another bakery? And I think this is a hard question, right? One is they think this person should not exist in business, right? This person should not be able to run this business this way, and we need to make an example of him, right? The trans example, I think, is harder because he went there knowing he wouldn't make the cake. This wasn't a good faith effort. The first one, the gay couple, they just walked in, they wanted a cake, and they had this news presented to them. So I think they were wrong. But there's a history of testing civil rights laws. So very often you'd have testers, they were called, where you'd have a black person go into an apartment saying, I want to rent it. And they would say, no, it's not available. And then like an hour later, a white person would go there saying, I want to rent this apartment. Oh yeah, it's available for rent, right? And they would deliberately go there to test the laws and to create various test cases. So I suspect that the trans person would say he was just trying to create a test case. That's why he was doing it. Take it for what you will. But again, I think the number of bakers in Colorado that will not make a gay wedding cake is probably very small, very, very small. I remember when this couple happened, like thousands of bakeries that will make you a cake for free. They got this outpouring of support nationally from across the country. So they got their cake. But there's just a handful of these bakeries that have these issues lingering. All right. I have a minute left. I don't know if I have time for a comment. If you want to raise your hand, I'm happy to call on you, but just about a minute left. All right, very responsible discussion. This is not an easy topic. In fact, I found that the gay rights issue is the most contentious one I teach, far more than abortion, far more than eugenics, far more than slavery. This issue, I think, gets the most juice going in class, which I'm grateful for, that people are passionate about these issues. All right, I'll run the minute poll now. We'll start in class on Wednesday. On Monday, the Establishment Clause, which will raise entire other sort of issues. Okay, thank you all so much.
I had just a quick question based off of something Cassie put in the chat. Is there any like jurisprudence on this to like suggest there's a difference between painting a painting a painting and baking a cake? Like a difference between like a fine art, like a commission for a painting versus doing something that's like for a commercial business? I
don't know. Ask an artist. I can't bake anything. I don't know.
Well, no, I just meant like legally. Has there been any like different?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the issues about what exactly is baking a cake like. It's a hard question. Listen, we're out of time, but I don't know the answer. All right, everyone, take care. Have a wonderful day, and thank you again.